Hey folks, my name is Chris A, and today I'm going to be talking about Twitch political debates. I thought this was going to be fun, or at least I was going to be able to make a salient point, but holy cow, this stuff is hard to get through. And before we get into it, a quick disclaimer: do not harass any of the streamers I discuss in this video. I'm going to be focusing primarily on a streamer by the name of Grace Roshong, and I'm picking Riley because we are ostensibly on the same side. I'm a leftist, and she's a liberal. And really, she's not the only one guilty of what I'm about to describe. I could easily pick someone on the right who is guilty of the same tactical errors, but then I'd just be pointing out a lousy thing done by a lousy person. Instead of that, I'd like to point out a lousy thing done by a reasonably decent person. Riley clearly puts a ton of effort into her work, both online and off. I do not believe Riley is a malicious person. I think she generally means well, and she's obviously got a great deal of influence on Twitter.com. I do, however, believe that her methods are imperfect, and I believe these methods are worth deconstructing. So, let's deconstruct.
One day at the forum, somebody asked Plato if he could define a man. The wise philosopher said there's only one way to, and I'll do it best that I can. A man is a creature that walks on 2 feet, no feathers on his wings. Bring me a man, it is agreed, that he will have both things. The forum erupted in thunderous applause. All the wise men were so pleased that Plato knew just what a human being was, and all their fears were eased. But the cynic Diogenes heard Plato talk, and he knew how to foil the plan. He pulled all the feathers out of a cock and announced, "Behold Plato's man."
Riley, or RGR as she's known, often leans her entire debate performance on an appeal to authority. Now, appeal to authority can sometimes be a fallacy, but it doesn't have to be. And honestly, when RGR first uses an appeal to authority in a given debate, it's usually justified. It's important in any intellectual conversation to establish a shared reality with definitions, axioms, and reliable sources, all firmly rooted in the ground. But what happens when the whole discussion revolves around a single definition?
Being a woman means something. I think that something changes over time, but it means something, you know?
Well, I mean, yeah.
Like here,
but,
like,
I mean,
all right,
like
you know,
saying,
just
like,
define
words
for
have
me.
meaning.
Hold on, I just need to make sure, like, define for me what a woman is. I know that TERFs do this all the time. I just need to hear, like, just to understand, like, what is a woman?
If you know one thing about RGR, it's probably this debate. The debate is her second most popular video on YouTube, and her third most popular is discussing this debate. In February of 2021, Riley joined her fellow streamer Demon Mama for a casual chat. This was not a formal debate. This was just 2 streamers having a little chatty chat, doing a little collab, no big deal. Over time, the topic of conversation shifted to the question, how do we define a woman? And the 2 disagreed on the answer. And I think that's fine. That's the point of having this discussion in the first place. RGR, as we might expect from a law student, had a pretty extensive and well-defined idea of what a woman is. All of her points were supported by evidence, and it was all written up in a very formal manner. Demon Mama, however, subscribed to the idea of self-ID.
Just to understand, like, what is a woman?
Yeah, I think a woman is a person who identifies as a woman.
Although I'm inclined to agree with Demon Mama, I believe both of these definitions have value. RGR is a law student with political aspirations. It's important that she be able to communicate effectively and unambiguously in a professional setting, and this definition reflects that.
I define a woman as a gender. A gender is based both objectively and subjectively. Objectively, meaning it's comprised of A, the totality of one's social expressions, B, the average reasonable person's interpretations of those expressions, and C, the average reasonable person's categorization of one based on those interpretations, and 2, subjectively, meaning it's comprised of the totality of one's involuntary thought processes, which lead one to make those expressions.
But I spent many years tutoring, and what makes an effective tutor is the ability to navigate different learning styles. Because everyone's brain works just a little bit differently, whether it's in a classroom or in the real world. Maybe some people resonate with the long list of well-defined rules that RGR believes comprise gender, and that's great. But I'm willing to bet there are a lot of people who feel like this is all a little bit unnecessary. And in that case, something like self-ID is far more useful. And believe me, I do not want to relitigate this whole debate. But I do want to insist on the legitimacy of both approaches, and by doing so, refute some of Riley's points. RGR's critique of self-ID was that it leads to logical contradictions. Like, if we look at a trans woman pre-transition, before they even knew they were trans, are they trans? Are they a woman? Are they wrong about who they are? To which I say, who cares? The real world isn't always logical, at least not in the if P then Q kind of way. Self-ID may seem to produce contradictions or edge cases or difficult questions on paper, but it's useful because it doesn't keep any trans people out. If someone comes out to me as a trans woman, is it more useful to check them against the official trans woman checklist, or should I just accept them? I will accept them. That, to me, is more important than sticking faithfully to some objective truth.
Objective I'm using to mean how the average reasonable person in a space or society interprets the totality of someone's expressions to categorize into a certain gender, right?
And if that was it, if the two just agreed to disagree, fine, I wouldn't be making this video. But Riley refused to accept that any worldview other than the one she laid out could possibly work. Her worldview was the valid one, and that, in fact, promoting a self-ID model was harmful to the trans community at large because it was such a bad argument.
I'm looking out for people to make sure that they don't make dumb arguments and lead themselves into bad situations that you would lead them into. If people make your arguments, they're going to get destroyed.
Riley.
So in my last video, I asked my viewers what they like to see in my content, and some people mentioned that they like to see me enjoy myself. So I told myself that if things got too heavy on this video, I should take a break for my sake and the audience's.
The question, what we were getting into earlier, do public displays of kink constitute a sexual act, and to what degree is it acceptable to expose children to sexual topics, and whose responsibility is it to maintain this degree of separation?
Every year we have the Kink at Pride discussion. For the uninitiated, there is an eternal burning question within the queer community. Do we allow displays of kink at Pride events? And the answer in almost all cases is, yeah, we have after-hours events or 18+ sections, and that's definitely more kink-friendly, but like the main parade and most of the public events are family-friendly, so there are some restrictions on behavior and attire. It's not a very sexy answer, but of course these events have dealt with this. The first Pride events were in 1970, and as queer identities have become more well accepted, Pride has become more legitimate and, out of necessity, more family-friendly. Event planners have it under control, and if they don't, take it up with them, not the queer community at large. And the only reason we're even talking about this is because some jokers on 4chan are trying to push the decades-old narrative that queer people are child abusers.
That looks innocent enough, doesn't it? Lots of young people hitchhike. Seems like a good way to get from one place to another. But sometimes there are dangers involved that never meet the eye. One never knows when the homosexual is about.
But hey, it's content. Earlier this year, RGR appeared in a Kink at Pride panel debate on Twitch, hosted by Hans of Harkir. And most of the people on the panel seem to acknowledge that these events are, generally speaking, competently organized, and this is kind of a problem that's already been solved. RGR, however, had a different focus.
Yeah, all right, let's say that someone is wearing a vibrating and they go to Pride and they start interacting with a child as they're vibrating, and then as they're interacting with that child, makes them right as they're talking to the child. Is that fine?
Okay, I know that's kind of unfair out of context, but come on, it's content. But why would this hypothetical even come up in the first place? Because according to Riley, every definition she found of kink included an appeal to a sexual desire.
I actually have several definitions from Merriam-Webster. I got Wikipedia. I got Urban Dictionary. I've found I've just Googled and I found as many as I could.
And hopefully just hearing that sounds alarm bells for you. Because we have a person who appears to have no real-world experience with kink or the kink community, and she was just like, here's what the dictionary says, therefore kink is sex, therefore kink in public is bad. And many of her fellow panelists were quick to point out that kink isn't always sex. Just ask anyone who's part of the kink community. But RGR wouldn't have it. The community's definition is nowhere near as reputable as Merriam-Webster's.
I have not found anyone who has said that kink is not sexual to provide a definition that somehow is more reputable and not referencing sexual desires or preferences.
And I gotta say, that's pretty short-sighted, right? Like, queer communities don't have the greatest track record when it comes to being understood by the academic community. I want to compare her tactic here with that of another Twitch debater, Big Papa Fascist. Although Big Papa Fascist, as the name suggests, is far to the right of Riley, he uses a very similar tactic. Of course, he's not a law student, so he's much less able to competently argue his case, but the core remains the same. This is the definition, end of discussion. Big Papa Fascist, or BPF as he's known, has this one argument that he brings out in any debate about, or really even just with, trans people.
Let's also not forget that transgenders who enter opposite-sex relationships often refer to themselves as being homosexuals, even though homosexuality, as we all know, is a same-sex relationship. It has nothing to do with gender whatsoever. To claim you are a biological male, but change your gender to a woman's, for instance, and then enter a relationship with a woman, that isn't a homosexual relationship. To claim it is logically inconsistent.
If gender is different from sex, and gay means homosexual, and homosexual means same-sex, then how can a trans woman be gay with a cis woman? And the answer to this is, of course, who cares? Who cares how these two people describe their relationship? Who cares if it doesn't quite match up with the American Psychological Association's definitions? Why should we put all our eggs in the basket of because the big smart people said so? Especially when it comes to something so nebulous and personal as gender or sexuality.
Let's talk about why gender is not a choice.
This next segment's not part of a debate per se, but for me it was kind of what inspired this whole video. It's only 60 seconds long, so I'm going to play most of it, and there's really nothing in it that I disagree with. If I had to answer a question like, is gender a choice, in less than a minute, I have no idea what I would say. Gender is not a choice, right? I mean, if you're cisgender, chances are you didn't choose to identify as the gender you were already assigned at birth. And if you're transgender, you've probably dealt with a ton of stress over the tension between what society tells you to be and who you really are.
According to the American Academy of PAs, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Counseling Association, the American Federation of Teachers, the American Medical Women's Association, the American School Counselors Association, the Child Welfare League of America, Devereux's Advanced Behavioral Health, Mental Health America, the National Association of School Nurses, the National Association of School Psychologists, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, the National Education Association, the School Social Work Association of America, and Voice for Adoption, there's broad scientific consensus that variations in sexual orientation and gender identity represent normal expressions of human diversity and cannot be changed at will.
So yeah, as we could have expected, Riley just names a bunch of institutions that believe that gender is not a choice. And that's fine to begin with, but it probably doesn't resonate with everyone. And even though it's true that gender isn't really a choice, we need to ask why that matters. If being trans isn't a choice, then it ought not be discriminated against.
From a legislative perspective, the argument for why trans people deserve any rights usually has to naturally come back to it's not a choice, it's who we are.
And totally, 100%. But I want to take it one step further. Even if it was a choice, would it be okay to discriminate? No. This is the United States of America. If you want to change your name and pronouns and get surgery and take hormones, you have every right to. Whether you're doing it to respond to some unquantifiable mental processes, or even if it is just a personal choice. These online debates so often end up hyper-focused on pinning down the exact definition of some amorphous concept. Which begs the question, why hold these debates in the first place? If RGR or Big Papa Fascist won't move beyond because the dictionary tells me so, what change will these debates create? As the world burns down around me, I feel like everything I do on my channel has to have some positive meaning, some deeper message, some call to action. I have spent so much time wringing my hands over, is it reasonable to do a Marxist analysis of High School Musical while there are literal concentration camps in the United States? And I still don't know the answer to that question. But what I do know is, even if I do fun, cutesy little videos about pop culture, they're not hurting anyone, right? I used to have this job where we would go to a bar after work every Friday, and every so often we would have one of those silly debates about, is a hot dog a sandwich or is cereal soup? And these debates were fun. Everyone had an opinion, and usually a quite strong opinion. But that was fine because there were no stakes, only hot dogs. Who cares if a hot dog is a sandwich or not? But the very act of playing a part in this mock debate, of needling out what makes a hot dog and what makes a sandwich, was somehow a fun way to unwind after a week of hard work. And I'll be honest, these Twitch debates scratch a very similar itch in my brain. I don't know if they're exactly fun to watch, but they're easy to get sucked into for hours at a time. But you may have noticed from my tone throughout this video, watching people debate on behalf of their own right to exist, that's a little bit less fun than is cereal soup. Sometimes debates over definitions can be fun, and sometimes they can be important, but when they're both, that's when things get difficult to watch. Ask a group of friends to agree on what a sandwich is, that's a fun Friday night. Ask 300 million people to agree on what gender is, good luck. Now, obviously people's definitions can be wrong, but no one's definition will ever be 100% right either, even if you have read all the literature.
The reason why is because I base my opinion based on the totality of all the academic literature on what gender is. I've read all the literature on what gender is.
So with all due respect to Miss Roshong and Mr. Fascist, I'm fine with the search for the perfect definition, but that will never be more important to me than just respecting people's humanity. A couple weeks ago, there was this meme that was floating around transgender Twitter. Basically, trans women would post selfies before and after their transition with the caption, "If you want to be a girl, you can just be a girl." Now, you and I can get into how actually gender is not a choice, so suggesting that anyone wants to be a girl is logically inconsistent. But what I saw on Twitter was not logical inconsistency. It was just a bunch of trans women, happy and proud of their transition. Again, there's great value in academic theory. As a non-binary millennial, much of the understanding I have of my own gender is rooted in theory. But if someone told me when I was a kid, if you don't want to be a boy, you don't have to be, well, that probably could have saved me a lot of time. There's a tendency among academics to overestimate the utility of academia, especially when it comes to questions of the human experience. So, why do trans people deserve civil rights? Because they f***ing rule. Next question. Thanks for watching. Please like and comment on this video, and click here to subscribe, and click here to watch the next video.